So now I get to talk to who most people in franchising would call my favorite person in franchising, Stephen Beagleman. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Hi, Nick. How you doing today?
Good. So obviously, you and your team spent an exhaustive amount of time looking at websites. So we'll start there, and we'll see where our conversation goes. General feedback. I mean, you've been in the business for a long time. General feedback on how websites have become such an important part of the sales process.
Nick, they're a real important part of the sales process today in franchising. So, if you look back, I've been in this business 30 years. People didn't have websites. Now, it comes to the point where potential franchisees or candidates go to the website before they even contact the franchisor. So it's critical that their website looks great, presents the brand in a great way, which gets candidates excited enough to want to have a conversation with the franchisor. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, they didn't even exist and people called the franchisor to have conversations. So today it's just very different than it was in the past. And people really need to make sure that their websites are, up to date, look great, and present the brand in a great way that gets the candidates excited enough to contact the franchisor.
So you guys work with a lot of, call it emerging brands or the startup brands that flash back to call it 20 years ago, where it was a world of picking up the phone and dialing. It must have been a little bit more challenging to create awareness for a startup brand. Is that accurate than today?
Yeah, from an awareness standpoint, I would agree it was, because if you had 2 locations or 3 locations and somebody contacted you and was interested and you had a phone conversation with them, how did you convey the excitement of the brand other than just on a phone call, right? And then eventually, hopefully, meeting the candidate. Whereas today, you could present your brand in a great way with a website that really makes you, exciting, and tells some great stories about your brand to get the potential franchisee excited enough to want to go through the process, contact you, have a conversation, and eventually go through a discovery day. So today, emerging brands have, I think, an advantage, more of an advantage than they had 20 and 30 years ago with candidates, because they can convey a message and make their brand look really bigger than it is through their websites.
So let's stay on the merging trail for a second. You rep some interesting growth stories, like a Gym Guys that did everything right. They invested in the franchise sales process. They have a founder who is high energy, that helps the candidate feel comfortable in the sales process. They've invested in the digital side to make sure that their website could work. And frankly, I don't know where they ranked in the rankings, but from a holistic approach to how they handled franchising, to go from startup to emerging to emerging, growing, or on the way to being an established brand, it seems like they've hit all the check marks. Along the way, as you're looking at it from an advisory standpoint, to say this is the point where you should invest in your development site as a part of that toolkit, what are you saying to emerging brands or startup brands that are coming to you and saying, I want to become a franchise? How do I separate where I'm going to invest my funds?
Yeah, so, a Gym Guys, who you were talking about before, has done a great job of constantly reinvesting and updating their website and the content that's on their website to make their brand, even bigger than they are. And today, a couple hundred, territories that they've developed. But back in the beginning, when Josh first started, he had the opportunity to convey a message out there and make his brand look bigger than it even was. And he did a great job with that, and has constantly reinvested in the technology to make their brand look even bigger than they were, whether it's video testimonials, customer testimonials, employee testimonials, whatever it may be, getting that message out there, which related really well to the consumer, to the end user. So whether it was from somebody who wanted to use a personal trainer or somebody who was interested in a franchise, they were conveying the message to everyone, which was great. So I think that brands need to invest in technology. It's a challenge for emerging brands because they have limited funds, If you're an established brand, a big brand with 500,000 units, you're going to always invest in the technology to update your website. Today, you need to have a budget line item in your P&L for updating your technology every year. It's not something that you could say, okay, I'll do it once every 3 years and it'll be fine. If that happens, you're just not going to grow, and you're going to have more challenges compared to everybody else in the marketplace.
So it is a double-edged sword for a beginning franchisor, because on one side it's going to cost you a lot to do that development site. Therefore, those funds aren't going to go towards inbound marketing, and two, without it, the inbound marketing won't work. So when you're becoming a franchisor, if you don't have it, you're already playing from behind.
100% you are. So every one of our brands, we tell them you need a website because it's the first place that a candidate's going to go to learn about your brand. And a lot of times they'll go to the website before they even call you, as I said earlier. So your website needs to look great. It's got to convey the image that you want and get them excited. But you're right, the website itself isn't a lead, right? People go to the website who are interested in your brand. So not only do you have to spend funds to create the website, you need to spend funds on marketing to generate leads to get people to go to your website.
Oh, right.
So, and franchisors, when they're starting out, emerging brands, it is a challenge, you're right, because they have limited funds. And we encourage them, obviously, to make sure the website looks great. There's no point spending money on marketing if you don't have a great website for people to go to, right? If your website is broken and you don't have, for example, a page that can capture the lead, can capture their information, for more information. You don't have a page that has that. You're spending money on leads, and they're coming to your website, and then they have no way of contacting you except the phone number. Well, that's great. You definitely want a phone number there, but you also want a form page where they can reach out to you electronically through email.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some brands that we've examined as a company, the other statement that I put is you can't put lipstick on a pig. That you can't go full boat onto a website and expect it to correct all of your challenges as a brand if your validation is off, if your lead generation tactics aren't good, if your unit level economics are poor, if you haven't established a vision, if you don't know what your why you why now is, and all these other variables. That the cautionary piece is, don't overinvest into a website until you've looked at a holistic approach to your brand.
Yeah, and that's totally true, right? So, if you need a new website and it's, 10, 20, $30,000, whatever it costs to do, that's great. But you're absolutely right. If you have 10 franchisees or 20 franchisees and your validation is really poor, until you fix the validation, it doesn't make sense to invest in, updating your website or spending more money on lead generation. We hear that all the time from, emerging brands that we work with that say, I want more leads, I want more sales. For franchise development. Well, that's great. What's your validation like? Well, I really don't want to talk about that.
Right.
Have you done a validation study? Have you done a secret shopper program? Because if you haven't done those things, you need to do those things. And then when you find out what the results are, sometimes you need to invest some time and some money and resources in fixing whatever those challenges are before you go spend money on updating the website and lead generation programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So one other thing that came out of just looking at trying to gain insights from how our judges approach the sites, and I am not a judge, so I have not evaluated these sites, but I'm looking at it just from some of the feedback that I'm looking at. That if it comes to an FDD, or you're helping franchise a business, you have best practices to follow. There is a blueprint to follow. But when it comes to development sites, it seems like the opinions of all of our judges, there are some similarities, but there is definitely a vast difference in what is good and what is not. Therefore, to the buyer and to the franchisor, it's hard to say this is the best practice from a franchise site, that this is what you have to do to best set up your prospect to work through the pipeline and become a lead. Do you find that too, that in websites, it's hard to determine a best practice because there are so many variables that exist outside of what that website is going to do for you?
Yeah, I mean, every brand is different, Nick. So certainly that's why companies hire us. That's why companies hire your company. They want advice and guidance on what's best for their brand. And, if it's a full service restaurant, you want a certain image because you're looking for maybe multi-unit, franchisees. versus if you're a home-based service business and semi-absentee. So you certainly don't need as sophisticated a website if you're of a home-based business. So it all depends on the concept. Depends on the type of franchise candidates and franchisees that they're looking for. And and then we provide guidance, and I'm sure you guys do the same at No Limit and 1851 for the brand on what we think is best for them. But it's not one size fits all. So we really need to cater to what the brand is and the concept is to figure out what's the the best way to position it from a marketing standpoint.
What frustrates you most about franchise development in today?
I think the most frustrating part today compared to 20 and 30 years ago is the candidate doesn't have to pick up the phone and speak to you right away.
Right.
And if you don't convey your brand the right way through the website and through your marketing efforts, you never get that lead. Whereas 20 and 30 years ago, they had to have a phone conversation with you. So I want to make sure that our brands get a chance to get up to the plate. So we want to make sure the websites look great, and want to make sure that lead contacts us or contacts our brands so that they can, have conversations with them and then eventually take them through the process and bring them in for discovery day. So I think the frustrating part is it's a little bit of a longer sales cycle because people want to do their due diligence prior to really even having detailed conversations with the franchisors. So that's a little bit frustrating today compared to the way it was in the past.
Do you think expectations of the franchisor is getting better? Are they setting realistic expectations from a growth standpoint, or is it still they're getting out of the gate and saying I'm gonna have 100 units in 5 years?
I think they're more realistic today. We spend a lot of time with our brands, educating them on the process, and that you're not going to come out of the gate selling 100 franchises the first year. That's pretty rare that happens. And even if it did, how can you support them? You'd have to hire staff, and you might not be able to keep up, right? So we want brands to grow smart. Obviously, we want them to grow. That's important for them. And they have to be willing to add infrastructure and invest dollars up front to add staff, add technology, add marketing, all the things that you need to for a brand, right? We have, one client that, had one location and he bought 100 billboards from a marketing standpoint because he wanted everybody to think his brand was even bigger than he was. And that was great. I mean, he had such a crazy buzz about his brand. Well, not everybody's going to do that, right? That's a very expensive proposition to do. And I've had conversations with him, and he said when he gets his first 3 or 4 franchises open, he's going to do the same thing. He's going to buy another 100 billboards because he wants them to be real successful, and he knows it's going to generate franchise leads from it, and already has. And that's how he sold the first, 3 or 4 franchises. So, but not everybody's willing to do that. Not everybody has the funds to do that.
Well, that brings up an interesting point, and we can close on this point, but. We talked about the investment into a franchise site. You and I have talked in the past of the investment even into the whole franchising process, that it's not a cheap thing. The investment that happens as you're trying to make sure that you have a concept that is viable from a sales standpoint that can actually be franchisable. And then you get into the marketing, expensive, and you can take your client that spent on the billboards, expensive, smart in that the return that came off of that, he is going to reinvest into the brands because you're not going to be making money at 10 locations. You have to get to royalty sufficient at some point, but that could be 25, 30, 40, 50 locations depending on the brand. So the cost of franchising is not cheap. Would you advise a brand that's thinking about going into franchising to understand that if you're going to do this, you better come flush with capital?
Yeah, we talk to people about that every day. It's one of the conversations that we have initially before somebody, becomes a client with us is, do they have the, resources they need to franchise their business, right? So it's one thing to launch a brand and become a franchise. Then you need marketing dollars. You need to invest your time. It does require a lot of time. And people ask me all the time, what's the difference between your successful clients and the ones that really aren't successful? And the ones that really engage in the process of franchising, and that involves the financial resources, but it's also the time, right? Franchising is a big commitment, and you're no longer in the day-to-day operations of your business, and now you're running a franchise company. And if people want to extricate themselves from the day-to-day operations of their business and really become a franchisor and support franchisees, that's very exciting. If people say, I can't get out of the back kitchen, I have to make the pizzas on every Tuesday and Thursday and Friday night, nobody can make it as good as me, well, they're probably not ready to franchise their
Right.
business, even if they have the funds. So those are the conversations that we have with them initially to make sure they're prepared from a mental standpoint, from a physical standpoint, and from a financial standpoint, because you need all of them.
Steve, appreciate your insights. I think it's helpful to any audience that is watching this. And obviously, there's a lot of complexities that go into franchising. You're featured on the site quite often. So we appreciate all the advice you're giving to our readers.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me today.
Okay, take care.